when we set the show up and the cars were there, when we loaded in, it's such a emotional moment to see them together. If I buy a classic car, how easy is it to live with? Where can I have the most fun? What's the most stylish? And there's only one answer. Go Italian.
Hello there, everybody. Welcome to Horsepower Heritage. I'm Maurice Merrick, and greetings to all of you listening from places like South Yarmouth, Massachusetts, Mount Prospect, Illinois, Beaverton, Oregon, Cairo, Egypt, Nicosia, Cyprus, and Sheffield, England. Thanks for joining me once again, and may I say buongiorno, because today we're talking all about Italian automotive design with the creators of a very special new event called Macchinissima. Mike Baum and Bronson Page are consummate car collectors, and Dorian Valenzuela is an ace mechanic who specializes in Alfa Romeo and Porsche service and restoration. Now, they're all Los Angeles based, and of course, you know, LA is really an epicenter for car culture. And all three of these gentlemen are very creative guys, and together they realized that even in a crowded car event calendar, there was something missing, namely a carefully curated celebration of Italian machinery. Macchinissima focuses mainly on post-war cars, but certainly not exclusively. And in fact, they've also included Italian motorcycles and bicycles in the show. But the idea is to display the best of Italian design in a distinctive venue and really just create an immersive experience for their guests. We had a great time recording this one, and I want you to be sure to check out Macchinissima.com and give Mike, Bronson, and Dorian a follow on Instagram. All of those links are in the show notes for you. And if you enjoy Horsepower Heritage, please consider supporting the show with a donation. Go to buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage, and you can give as little as $2 or a higher amount of your choice. And you can even make that a monthly gift, which helps me continue to bring you the content you enjoy. So if you'd like to donate, that link is in the show notes as well. By the way, thank you to those of you who already contribute to the show. I know there are a lot of things you could be spending your hard-earned money on, and I appreciate your support. All right, stay right there, because we're talking Alfa Romeo, Lancia, Lamborghini, and more with the creators of Macchinissima. And that's coming up right after this. Hi guys, Maurice Merrick here, and I want to let you know about 3 great scale models available right now at modelcitizendiecast.com. First, there's the pocket-size Lancia Stratos HF Stradale in 1/64th scale by Mini GT. Or how about a BMW 3.0 CS Coupe in 1/43rd scale by Mini Champs in your choice of 3 different colors. Or if American muscle is more your style, how about the 1968 Shelby GT 500 convertible in great big 1/18th scale by Acme Trading Company. It's finished in Acapulco blue with white racing stripes, and boy oh boy, check out those mag wheels. You can find all of these and more at modelcitizendiecast.com. Use the promo code HERITAGE at checkout and get 10% off your order. Limitations apply. From race cars to street cars and everything in between, it's Model Citizen Diecast, because your inner child still wants to play with cars. All right, you guys, here we are in an amazing mid-century modern home in the living room of Mike Baum and Bronson Page, who are Italian car collectors and the creators with their friend Dorian Valenzuela of a show called Macchinissima, which is a curated celebration of Italian cars here in Los Angeles. They've put the show on twice now, and it has quickly become a favorite of the car community here. So, guys, thanks for having me in.
Oh, you're welcome. Pleasure. Happy we could make that work, finally. That's great.
Yeah, and we've been trying this for a while, right? I think we started talking about this about 6 months ago, and then, you know, you wake up one day and it's Monterey Car Week, and the calendar's full, but here we are.
Yeah, I mean, we had our show Macchinissima just 2 weeks, 10 days before the festivities up in Monterey. So it has been extremely busy the last half year, I want to say, to get the show ready.
Yeah, well, we had cars that went right from Macchinissima up to Monterey. So
yep.
Yeah, it was pretty back to back.
And this was the second year you guys put the show on, right?
Yes, it was.
And let's talk about the genesis of the show, because there's a certain Porsche show that has become the landmark Porsche show. And there was kind of...
Which one is that?
and there was a... I don't want to mention the competition. No, but there was a sort of a void when it comes to fine Italian cars in Southern California. And you guys have filled that void. It's pretty amazing. So what was the genesis?
It probably started, I want to say, a good 3-4 years ago, actually. And you're absolutely right. I mean, there's no denying that we took some inspiration from Luftgekühlt because, you know, we also like Porsches, and I think they did a bang-up job. But we also saw a void in presenting Italian cars in a different way. And there were two motivations, right? One, we just wanted to have fun with the cars. One motto was always, let's have a great party that also has insanely cool cars. The second thing that we really wanted to do is we wanted to get a younger audience closer to those cars. And you usually don't do this with big concourse events, right? Because it might not attract a younger audience. And with younger, I mean late 20s, 30s, what have you. So we thought, okay, how can we pull this off and do that? And that's essentially the thought process that Bronson and I had 4 years ago about Macchinissima. And then we met Dorian. And the first time we talked to him, it was essentially funny that you say that. I have exactly the same idea. And then we got a little bit more specific about planning a show.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Mike, because Dorian has kind of carved out a niche in Southern California and particularly in LA. Master mechanic has, his alphas have kind of hit a nerve with people. Like they've resonated. And it's so true that young people are kind of like in the dark about these cars, and for whatever reason, they're not relating to them. And I think that's that's not unusual, right? When I was in high school, everybody wanted a 5-liter Mustang with the body kit, right? But and I was going different directions. I had a 76 BMW 2002 when I was 17 or 18 years old, and they called it the Mr. Magoo Mobile. Because, I mean, think about it. It's kind of a 3-box design, not particularly sexy, but that was, for whatever reason, that's what resonated with me at the time. But so Dorian, you got to come in here because I think you've really done a lot for the classic Italian car community in LA.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks. I mean, I love cars. It's been a big part of my life. I think cars beyond just the actual vehicle. I lean heavily on the cultural references that they provide and the kind of nostalgia they bring to me. Movies and stuff, the cars that are in them, they stick in your head forever. Ferris Bueller, stuff like that. That you'll never forget these scenes that are so closely related to cars.
The Italian Job,
and I mean an endless list, right? And a lot along with that, I would say that music is a big part of my life. And as I get older, I came to kind of like figure out in my own head that like everything's connected in its own way, and everything is everything. And bringing all these things together, like almost like at work when I'm working on cars, I always have music playing, and I always have that kind of artistic influence going on. And it's part of the way I work. It's just kind of like I create my own environment, and that's what helps me be creative and do what I do. And I also happen to have a little bit of a background in music shows, a little bit of promotions, and kind of bringing all these things together with friends that vibe the same way and like similar stuff. When we started talking about doing something like this and kind of injecting a pulse into car shows, these guys were right there, yes, we feel the same way. And we got really excited, talking about and bouncing ideas off of each other. And a couple of wine dates and dinners later, I mean, everything felt so effortless. The name came together really quickly. Through Bronson just spit it out, and we just instantly screamed out yes, that's perfect. And everything came together really organically and really quickly. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of coming out of COVID, right, when we started to develop the idea.
Yeah.
So I think in general, we all had a bit of a cabin fever at the same time. And I think just the environment was just right for this to happen.
The name is absolutely perfect. Bronson, you deserve big props for that.
Yeah.
Dorian, I'm just curious, what are you listening to in the shop on a day-to-day basis?
Oh my God, nothing but like sad British 90s stuff, you know?
The Smiths and...
I mean, yeah, of course, but I listen to all kinds of stuff, and I have a
Morrissey on repeat.
Yeah, right?
Oasis lately. I mean, I listen to a lot of everything, but I lean heavily on dark wave, new wave stuff, Britpop era music, a lot of it, you know? Yeah.
Well, I mean, it is a milieu, right? And you're right, it all kind of swirls together eventually. And it's funny how we have these, I don't know, like these psychological worms that kind of bore into your brain, and you don't realize it maybe until years later where fascination comes from, or, you know, something that you really are drawn to. I mean, it was definitely that way for me with cars and music and stuff. And how about you, Bronson?
I mean, well, you touched on something earlier that really resonated with me is, you know, there's an element of nostalgia, and we're just of a certain age where there's a very specific kind of nostalgia, and it's no longer the Big Chill soundtrack, you know, that was then.
That's my mom's favorite soundtrack.
Right?
Funny
and
you
of
say
course,
that.
it's everybody's
And there's a
mom's
car
favorite
element in the
soundtrack.
beginning of that movie.
Right. But it's like nowadays you can go into Ralph's and they're playing The Cure. So, you know, there's a certain amount of that that's built in. And I think that this is where a lot of my frustration came, because I've always been into cars. But then when Mike took me to Car Week and we went to the Quail in Pebble Beach, I'm like, this is really cool, but it's just a little uptight. And it just wants to speak to the you know, to us, you know, to kids that grew up in the 80s. And so I think that was one of the ways in which we all vibed, because we're all big 80s fans, you know, and that was really a big energy behind it.
Yeah, Monterey can be a little stuffy, and I always find myself at the end of all these exclusive parties where you're drinking champagne and eating fancy food. I always go back into town and go to the dive bar and close the night out with a beer and like some chips, you know. It's like, so we have some ideas, by the way, about Monterey Car Week coming soon that we're hoping to be able to make happen. But yeah. We wanted something that's approachable, and wanted to bring kind of that Monterey experience down to the city, and let people see these things that they've only maybe seen on the internet or in photos or in books.
Well, I mean, let's get down to it, which is that the environment in which the cars are displayed is as important as the cars themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of elements that we knew up front that are super important to do a different car show. We probably spent months on the vibe, right? And we had to define it. You have to write it down so you actually know what you created. So we started with that. And for us, it's easy to connect on the cars. We know Italian cars inside out. We know what cars we want to have and what have you. But you need so much more for a really unique car show. The location is important. We do not want to be on a golf course. We don't want to be on asphalt, right? We don't want to do all of that stuff. So the location has to speak to the cars, and it has to be as unique as the cars that you present. You heard our passion for music. Music was a key element for us, right? And the right music. So we had to define our musical tastes around it that we want to pair with the cars. And it's really about planning this big party. So drinks, what you eat, where you sit, how you experience the cars. It's more than cars. Motorcycles came in. It's more than motorcycles. Bicycles came in. So it has all that connection, but you really have to think extremely thoroughly what experience you want to provide, right? And plan accordingly. And one thing that we also do is we really love sweating the details. So when you see things like the bar menu, it has to be right for the show, right? You cannot just show up at the food truck and, you know, buy your water and some no-name beer over there. It's just not working for a show like that, right? The vibe has to be right, and all these elements are super important for it. So we spent a long time on designing that, and then essentially when we thought, this is it, let's do the first one. Then we went
and this
into
is why you have a
execution mode.
German on the staff.
That's what I was about to say the same.
Precision engineered. I love it. You know, Mike, growing up in Germany, you were much closer to Italian cars the origin of the Italian car. In the 80s, it was tough to find a brand new Italian car in the U.S. I mean, Alfa kind of made that run with in the mid 80s, but was it an early fascination for you?
I grew up in southern Germany, so my first affinity to cars was close to where I grew up, to Stuttgart. So Mercedes and then Porsche. Porsche was just a halo car in Germany. Cars for me started probably around high school. That's when we got into having our own cars and working on them. And it started out with stuff that we could afford, which was clapped out Beetles. But I remember I was 17 probably, and I bought my first German classic car magazine. And they had an article in there on the Pininfarina designed Fiat Spider. And I lost it. I'm like, this was the most gorgeous thing that I've ever seen. So yeah, on the street, you saw a lot of Fiats and the Alfas, especially Alfa suits in the days that I grew up. In these days, they were not necessarily differentiated by design because they were all mass produced, right? So I didn't get an affinity of Italian cars just because I saw them on the street.
Yeah, like a Fiat 124 is not spectacular,
or an Alfa suit, same thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, depends on what Alfa suit. I shouldn't, trash talk it. There can be great cars, but it's not a 50s Alfa that was designed by a Pininfarina or a Bertone or what have you, or Touring, right? But anyway, I saw that Fiat Spider and I was off. This was my introduction to classic cars, and that was early on my introduction to Italian cars. And it was also my introduction to Italian designers and coach builders. That's where it essentially started. And till this day, I still want the Fiat Spider.
If only you had bought one then.
In these days, this was actually the late 80s. This was a high boom for classic cars. That was before Euros. And I remember I saw this car and I'm like, I want one. And I looked in the back, they had the advertisement for those cars. And these Fiat Spiders went for 200,000 Deutschmarks, which was insane in those days. But then when was it? 1989, 1990, the classic car market crashed, right? But yes, in these days, I couldn't have afforded one. All I could afford was a 1969 Beetle rusted out. That was it.
Italian design has really made its mark on German cars too. There was a lot of crossover particularly in the 60s and 70s. There's all those jokes about the Germans can engineer the car and make it reliable and fast and precision, and the Italians can make it beautiful, but neither of them can do the other thing.
It's interesting. Yes. I mean, there were a couple of German manufacturers who dabbled with Italian designers. Probably the one that comes to my mind the most is BMW.
With Michelotti, yeah.
They worked together with Bertone, right? They started in the 60s with that. Giugiaro actually designed the BMW 503, which is a gorgeous car, right? A little frumpy front end, but overall gorgeous car in the design language of Alfa Romeo GT Veloce or the 2600 Alfa that he did in the same period. This is actually the origination of the Hofmeister kink.
That's right, on the BMW.
Came from Bertone, and then Hofmeister, the designer of BMW, continued it till this day. And then Michelotti, naturally, when BMW needed some money from the Quant family and needed to design a new series with the 1600s that became the 2000s and the 02s, that all was designed by Michelotti and then refined by the design studios in Munich.
Yeah, the Neue Klasse.
Yeah, exactly.
And I just wanted to make that detour for a second because in case you think that Italian design is maybe provincial, I think it's universal in a lot of ways. People respond to it, and other manufacturers in other nations realize this. And a good example of that would be in the 1950s when Virgil Exner and Chrysler collaborated with Ghia, and they made a series of incredible cars. So Italian design really doesn't know a border, and that's a great thing for car fanatics like us, right? But let's talk about maybe pick a few of your favorite designs and kind of dissect them a little bit for people. What makes them interesting, fascinating, landmark, and so forth?
I would be able to talk for 10 hours about that.
I know
so
you would. That's
give it
why I
up.
asked the question.
I let Bronson and Dorian speak first.
I mean, Giugiaro is one of my favorite designers, and I'll be honest, I don't know tons about automotive design. I learn more every day, and I know what I like, and I double down on things that I really love. But for sure, I'd think the 105 series of Alphas is one of my favorites for several reasons. And the design of the 105, the GTV, the Giugiaro design is one of my favorite, and the fact that he did it at such a young age is always been such a fascinating story to me. But at the same time, the entire 105 series is so beautiful. The four-door cars, the spiders that they made out of those, and the fact that they share so many parts but are so different in terms of their chassis, in terms of like their body panels, outer panels anyway. Of course, they share mechanical parts largely, but I just think culturally they made such a huge impact, and I think they really helped. They're production cars, and they really helped preach the religion of Italian car design, and made them available to somebody that maybe is coming out of school or is a working man that can actually attain these cars back when they were new. They weren't cheap by any means, but it might be the equivalent of buying a 3 Series BMW these days in terms of what they cost back then. Cheaper than a Porsche, but more than your maybe your BMW 2002, or more than your Golf GTI or something like that in their day.
If you were a solid middle class Italian guy, you could afford an Alfa Romeo Giulia for your family car.
Yep.
Everyone else most people were in Fiat Cinquecentos and the 600, but the 105 series was it was a step up. It was like the Oldsmobile of Italian cars. Solidly built, some good performance. Just so people have a little bit of a background, the basis of the cars was a twin cam engine starting at, I think, 1300 cc.
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah, it's probably the most common engine size, with 1300.
Right, and then they went up all the way through 2 liters.
Yeah,
but that engine design first came out in 1954, and it ran for 40 years. I mean, it was the small block Chevy for Alfa.
One of the best engines of the 20th century. It's an amazing aluminum case engine. It is, you can do anything with this engine. Sounds good, drives good. It's wonderful, easy to maintain, technically advanced, right? With dual overhead camshafts and the aluminum case in it. It's just a marvelous car, a marvelous engine. We love it. We have how much? 2 or 3 of them, right? And it's just absolutely amazing to drive.
And then with that, the Alfa in the 50s was very curvy, and they went to a much more boxy design for all of the cars, really. And so the Giulia with a 3-box design, I think it was Ivo Colucci was the design chief at the time, but that was groundbreaking because suddenly the 60s were here, right? It was much more simplified.
Not only simplified with the Giulia that they introduced in 1963, it was the first car that was particularly developed in the wind channel. So it was optimized for aerodynamics. And because of that, the car had a very peculiar shape, right? It was very 3-box, but it was very boxy, and it has these scalloped sides, all that stuff that they put on, and the cam tail naturally, right? For a Berliner, essentially a 4-door car, right? So it was a very, very advanced car. On top of that, they developed the new 1600 variant of the twin cam engine. So they gave it really some go. So talking about the birth of the sports sedan, this is where it started, right? And thank you for BMW for essentially borrowing all of it from Alfa Romeo. And that was an in-house design, right? And then, as always, right, in the 60s, they contracted out the more sportier model. So Bertone and Giugiaro could do the coupe, and Pininfarina could do the convertible. Touring had a short stint of doing a convertible based on the Bertone design. But that's what's the fascinating aspect of it. So in Italy, these companies came out with a platform, and then all of a sudden the coach builder came in, right? And I think Italy is probably the country that pushed that the furthest and the longest with coach builder. Ultimately, they had to give in because of economies of scale. It just, doesn't make any more sense financially. But that's, I think, mainly responsible for the beauty of Italian cars, the whole industry, the cottage industry of coach builders that you had for the longest time in Italy all the way up to the 70s.
Yeah, and I got to say, like, one thing that I don't hear talked about often about Italian cars, and in particular, really like the 105 series, which you're talking about right now, is the fact that, they were a little bit more expensive than maybe some cars and cheaper than others. But in terms of value, what you got for your money is quite a bit. And I don't just mean in terms of an Alfa or a beautiful car, but when you get under an Alfa, which I'm spent a significant part of my life under Alfas, the forgings, the parts, the engineering, they were really doing some remarkable things in the late 50s into the 60s. The processes they were using, the hardening, the forging, very complex and sophisticated suspension systems, the materials, there's all kinds of materials in an Alfa. And they're just such interesting cars and so advanced for their day. They were putting disc brakes on grocery getting cars when nobody else was doing that in period. In the 50s, they were already doing that. Aluminum and magnesium and exotic materials that they were using. When you take a car apart, you realize that all the hardware specific to the particular part of the car versus maybe some other cars, American and German cars, that use a lot of the same hardware size or bolt. Alfa liked specifying the lengths and the shoulder lengths of parts and hardening, and they really put engineers to work in Italy in the day, and they were really pushing the boundaries. So Alfas are beautiful and all that, but don't forget, underneath, they're absolutely gorgeous. I mean, they're real marvels, and they really stand the test of time. They were doing stuff that was 10, 20, 30 years ahead of the curve.
Well, after all, prior to World War II, Alfa Romeo was a rather exclusive manufacturer. I mean, heavily into competition. The Grand Prix cars of the 1930s, Alfa Romeo's fantastic. That's where Enzo Ferrari managed the racing program. And the coach work on many of the street-going Alfas pre-war was just incredible. But then after the war, they became a mass-market car. It was definitely a pivot in their business plan. But they didn't forget where they came from, which is so important. And so your everyman could have a little bit of sporting performance.
Yeah, I mean, totally, right? When after the war, they developed the 1900 series. And that was the car designed for assembly line building, right? They started with the Berliner again, the four-door, and that was a pretty good success. Again, right? Leveraging racing heritage and just putting an awesome engine into these cars. And then they also outsourced the more elaborate or sportier models to Zagato, to Touring. Pininfarina built a couple of them. But then what put them on the map was the four-cylinder engine and the birth of the Giulietta, which is, a whole story by itself. Everything is delayed. People bought, paid down for the cars, and they don't get it. The Alfa doesn't get it together, and almost everybody in Italy was revolting against it, and they made a raffle, right, for a sporty model, and that's how the Giulietta Sprint came into life. Originally designed in-house, but then Franco Scaglione essentially designed the car. And it was a sensation. In 6 weeks, he cranked this design out, right, together with Alfa Romeo designers. And look at the history and at the beauty of that car. And by the way, it's the best events car you can get. We have one. We love it. Put it on events. Totally reliable and a blast to drive.
And I think it's really fascinating when you look side by side at the cars that they were making in Italy in 1957 and the cars we were making in the States in 1957. I grew up, my mom was a model for GM. And so I grew up around American steel, like for as long as I could remember. And I was certainly well acquainted with the 57 Chevy Bel Air. And then you put that in the in the universal consciousness next to the Giulietta Sprint. And it's like, wow, these are, aside from just the narrower streets in Italy, these are just diametrically opposed vehicles. And there's just so reflective of different things that are going on in different continents of the world. I mean, it's just really, really fascinating, divergent pathways for design, and still two beloved pathways just the same,
Despite what everybody says, once an Alfa, the 4-cylinder Alphas, once that is set up, they're extremely reliable cars. They're fun. The suspension is marvelous. Very soft on the Giulietta, but absolutely marvelous. We were raving about the engine already. And, it came in Normale spec and in Veloce spec. The Veloces are magical.
Yeah,
it's a magical experience.
You compare a Giulietta to a 356 of its day. Let's just say a 56 Speedster. Name the top dog of its day, and then you put a Giulietta Spider next to a Veloce. Once again, I mean, going back to the form of the car is one thing, and that's subjective. I understand that, but when you look at the artistry of the engineering behind it, I mean, Porsche had swing axles, pressed steel parts throughout, huge drum brakes, bit of a bathtub design, and a pushrod engine, which is the same technology that a Briggs & Stratton lawnmower has. And then here you go, Giulietta. Okay, twin overhead cams, magnesium cast valve cover,
shots fired.
Mower.
I mean, hardened nitride coated crankshaft with a independent suspension in the front, beautiful articulating suspension in the rear. It's just, not only is it beautiful, but it also, once again, like really what they do, their art form is not just in terms of shape and form and design, but it's also in their engineering. And rev both cars next to each other, you might think someone's mowing your lawn outside versus the Le Mans is starting. I'm sorry, I have to say it though, because the prices that people pay for 356s sometimes blow me away. For in terms of like Porsches, value, and I do too. I own some,
sure, and they're not even getting the lawn blade option with it.
I mean, you got to talk a little smack. It's like David and Goliath in many ways.
Well,
we're the underdog, says we can take jabs, but honestly, like to someone that like loves cars not just only for their form or for their look or whatever it might mean to them, like if you love it through and through for what it is, there's a lot of reasons why to love Italian cars in general.
Now, people couldn't see Mike almost lose it and fall off the couch when you said Briggs and Stratton, but that was good. Well, I mean, Porsche, to their credit, they knew that engine was already obsolete, and that's why they came out with the 4-cam, and the rest is history.
Well, the 4-cam, don't get me started on that, because that's not a great engine.
I mean, it's crazy complex.
Yeah, and why? It makes no power.
Yeah,
I mean, for the sake of being expensive, and it's just not a good engine. I'll bring it on.
But that's also why they came up with the marvelous Flat 6 and the 911, which I think is another absolutely top engine of the 20th century.
I mean, we're talking,
that
and
engine
that's,
is right.
Yes,
it's marvelous.
Flat 6, beautiful balance, primary secondary balance is perfect. Very good engine, no doubt.
I love strong opinions held passionately. I mean, because you have to work on opinions.
I'm just kidding.
Facts only.
But I mean, you have to work on these cars, and you've worked on all kinds of different stuff. So you have a different perspective than maybe just an owner.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have a background in engineering, and I'm not any expert in anything, and I'm not a master engineer or anything like that. But like, as someone that like appreciates manufacturing as well and stuff like that, I look at one and the other, and I'm like, wow, like these guys really took it way further than they needed to, and wow, and then you think about when it was made and what you can get at the time for the same money, and then it really starts to like kind of blow your mind, so. A lot of reasons to like these cars, and there's a lot of reasons why I like them as well. It's funny because following the 105 series was the fairly unsuccessful Alfetta series of cars, which carried along that engine, which was starting to become aged at that point. The Bialbero twin cam engine was pretty dated at that point, but the chassis of an Alfetta, I mean, talk about sophisticated, transaxle mounted, perfect 50-50 balance, and they were really going for the future. And Porsche was aiming towards doing something similar with the 928 at the time, right?
Yeah, and this is we're talking about 1974, 75.
Yeah, that's 74 exactly. Then is when they started to launch the junior versions of these cars. The Alfetta first started to be developed and released, and so did the 924 followed shortly after, which are actually quite similar cars in terms of their layouts. And Porsche was thinking about getting rid of the 911 and merging into a front engined
That's right.
car with a little bit better balance.
And they tried their hand at the 924 and the 944, and it was. You notice they haven't gone back that direction.
No, I mean
they did with the SUVs, right? And,
Right.
With those, but I mean, we smack talk Porsche all the time, but we love Porsche, right? My second classic car is a Porsche 911, and we still own it now for 20 years. I mean, 911 hands down is just the most marvelous car that has ever been. So we love them, right? And we also adore front engine Porsches. I mean, Bronson and I, we have been looking at 968s Club Sports now forever. Lovely, lovely car. But when it comes to shelling out the dollars, it always goes to Italy. I wonder why.
Yeah, it's a really, really exquisite car for not being Italian.
It's the only drawback. You guys, what about Lancia? Because this is a brand that most Americans know very little about, and they don't even know how to say Lancia. It's not Lancia.
It's not Lancia. Lancia.
Lancia. Vincenzo Lancia was the founder of the company in, I want to say, 1903 or something.
Oh, they're over 100 years. When was the 100-year celebration for Lancia? I don't remember, but one click away. But, I mean, Alfa is like your red-blooded, cousin. Lancia is very elegant. Everything about Lancia is elegant. The engineering, the innovation, right? They bet Alfa with innovations. First, and then the design. The design is elegant and slightly off, I want to say, because Lancia went for a look with the coach builders that you could identify, that you could not see in anything else. If you look at the Lancias that were built by Touring, right, lots of touring cars. If you look at the Lancias that are built by Zagato, they are very, very unique in the design language. But the engineering was top-notch. First V6, first 5-speed. First monocoque chassis, and God knows what else. Came out in the early 60s with front-wheel drive, and with an amazing driving experience in front-wheel drive that won everything in rallying, right? Amazingly innovative company. They did not think about economies of scale. They did not think about dollars, and that's why they were bankrupt like 85 times in their history, right? But the cars are absolutely superb. I mean, apart from Alphas in our garage, Lancias is right there with them.
And even a V4 in the Fulvia, right?
Narrow. There was the narrowest angle V4 in a car ever with a one-piece cylinder head because, with, 10 degrees, a little bit under 10 degrees or something. Didn't need.
It's I don't have a lot of launch experience, but it's kind of VR6. Volkswagen took a lot of cues from that because it's a one single cylinder and yet still a V4. Very interesting design, and once again, Italians always pushing the boundaries and trying interesting things.
Yeah, we love Lancias. I mean, we had them, we drove them, we take them on tours. Marvelous.
And it's interesting how you were saying before the Alfa Romeo sedans, like that's the car that someone could buy to carry their family around in and do that. And one thing that really made an impression on me when we picked up the Flavia, Mike said, so this is the young executive on the rise car. And it made total sense. And he's like, and you're always getting a really good value with Lancia because it's over-engineered to death. And it's so precise.
Lancias right now, right, in the United States, they attract a lot of creatives. They attract a lot of architects for some reason.
Interesting. I noticed that as well. Creatives, artists, architects.
Engineers. And if you are looking for an absolutely unique and amazing entry into the Italian car world, a Lancia Fulvia from the 60s or a Lancia Flavia, anybody style, right? Could be a Berliner, Could be something from Zagato, which is affordable. Could be something that they did in-house. Amazing cars and not a lot of money. We are in LA. Here in LA, we are lucky that we have people that can take care of those cars, like Dorian and a few others, which is not a lot of cost to maintain those. Absolutely amazing cars.
A lot of cost.
If somebody comes to me and says, "What should I buy as a first Italian cars?" I always go, "You always can go buy a 105 series, right?" But a Lancia Fulvia Coupe is absolutely the car that I would recommend to everybody. 25 to 30,000 buys you the best in the world, and it's insane fun and insane design.
We had two at Macchinissima too, both owned by women. One is a stunt driver, professional stunt driver, and the other is an engineer
at SpaceX.
At SpaceX. Yeah. And the cars are beautiful. And I think which one of them bought the car and then restored it overseas painstakingly? Isn't that there was
Sarah. Yeah. Gorgeous car that she bought in a unique color, had work done in Europe, drove it all over Europe, and now the car is here.
What color is it, Mike?
It is a light green, almost minty, but very gorgeous in a unique color. Lancia, that's the other thing. I mean, what they put into color development, the colors you can get on these cars, it's insane. One shout out for Lancia. You were saying 3-box design. Where does 3-box design come from? Pininfarina designing the Lancia Aurelia Florida, probably after the Cisitalia that he designed in the late 40s, the most significant design in car history. That car put Berliner's and 3-box design on the map, and it's absolutely gorgeous, which then turned into the Lancia Flaminia Berliner, the 4-door, and the Lancia Flaminia Coupe, which was produced by Pininfarina. Total value cars, especially the Coupe, absolutely amazing car. And from a design perspective, we're talking about history that influenced everybody, and not everybody knows about that.
No, excellent point. We were talking about servicing these cars a moment ago. Dorian, how hard is it to source parts for them? Just service parts.
For Alfa Romeos, I think we're at an all-time good time to be in them. I mean, a lot of the kind of resto modding that's been happening with these cars, largely due to people like Alphaholics providing those images and those beautiful cars, have made for a lot more availability of parts, I've noticing, and it's a really good time to be into, at least for like the late 50s, early 60s Alphas, into the 70s for sure. So parts availability are really at an all-time high, and awareness and knowledge of the cars is as well. I don't have much difficulty finding parts that I need for these cars anymore. We still kind of fight for like some of the more rare stuff like trim parts or restoration, etc. But in terms of like maintenance stuff and performance stuff, wow, really, really good time to be around. I do a lot of restoration, obviously, and hot rod parts, making these cars fast is I remember digging through catalogs and driving far away and begging people to sell you parts, and that's just not the case anymore. A couple clicks on the internet and going to various sites, and you can get almost anything you need for these things now. The one part about these cars is they have a little bit of an organic nature to them, so it's not so much like buy, install, go. There's some level of like blueprinting and hand fitting parts of these cars. Like you don't really have to do so much for other. Porsche, for example, it's a lot easier to work on them. I think they parts tend to bolt onto those cars a little easier. And with the Alphas, they have a little bit more. You have to have a little bit more of an old school approach to these cars, but very good time to be into these things for sure.
Well, I mean, values rising usually means that parts sources grow as well. Unfortunately, a lot of times that means that the sources of those parts aren't so great. Like, for example, a lot of British cars, those parts are coming out of Asia. They aren't what the factory original part would have been. They're just not the same quality. They're not the same fit. They're not the same materials. So is that a concern among owners? Like you want something that is just like the original?
Yeah, I always try to use original parts. Ideally, restore the original parts to the car. Like if I do a restoration, I put everything away and try to reuse as much of the original parts as I can. But we pluck original camshafts and stuff like that for engines and pretty much never use them again. But in terms of parts, a lot of them come from Italy and Eastern Europe. I'm seeing. Not so much Asian. I don't think there's any Asian parts that go into the restoration of the cars I do, really. I do see Asian parts going to like Porsches and some of the British stuff that I've seen come through the shop. Genuine Porsche parts, some of them I think are starting to be made in Asia now as well. But for the Italian cars, they tend to come from Eastern Europe.
Yeah, interesting.
Romania. Where else do I see parts coming from? Funny enough, Greece, and a lot come from Italy and of all places, England. A lot of the new stuff is coming from there as well.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because I mean, British cars, man, you're lucky to get like rubber seals, things like that. Things that really need to fit right, like, or things that you expect to last a long time end up deteriorating very quickly. And yeah, a lot of the British cars that they suffer from that problem. But anyway,
I'm not so sure if the parts, that were original on the car survived that long, because in these days, what was the life expectancy of a car? 5 years or so before they rusted away, right? If Zagato built it, it should have lasted a season and that's it, right? But for the four-cylinder Lancias and the Alfas that we talked about, the four-cylinder ones, even the six-cylinder cars, there's also a way, way bigger network in Europe that you can tap into and you get the stuff. Mechanically, I think Fulvias, Flavias, Giuliettas, easy to take care of. On our Giulietta, we rebuilt the engine. We rebuilt engine, transmission, and the rear diff, and we paid less than the rebuild of a 911 engine, way less. So it tells you a little bit, what you can get out of a car when you want to maintain it. Body parts and interior parts, decorative parts, trim parts is a slightly different story. We have a Lancia was built by Zagato, and it came without sun visors. And this car has weird windows in the back, so it needs 4 sun visors. You can't find anything. So we had to remanufacture those, and we did that in the UK.
Because that's really important for anyone considering ownership of one of these cars. How am I going to service it and source parts, right? And luckily, Dorian is here for you guys, but in a lot of places in the U.S., good luck finding a mechanic who knows Alfas or Lancias. So pretty challenging. We are so fortunate here in Southern California to have the resources and the concentration of cars that you can even put on a show like Macchinissima. But some of your cars inevitably that are in the show come from other parts of the country, right? I mean, you got the show is important enough that you've got guys shipping the cars in, right?
On the second one, we did, yes. I mean, keep in mind, that was our second show, right? So
sure.
We're still very...
Yeah, but Mike, for year 2, it was amazing.
Yes. I think we grew pretty quickly. I think it had to do that the concept really resonated after we put on the first proof point. But going back to your question, for the second show, yes, we got cars from Northern California. The longest one was probably coming out of Florida, the TZ that, we were happy to then have here for a couple of weeks. And we had cars coming from Oregon. Mainly so the majority was still in Los Angeles. And I would say Los Angeles probably together with Seattle, Miami, and New York are the hotbeds of Italian cars.
Right.
It's probably the hotbed for Italian cars in all of the United States. So we're very fortunate that we have these amazing collectors, these amazing people that have those. And we can collaborate with them for Macchinissima.
I was going to say, we call it our second year, but really it's our first because the shows were within a few months of each other, December and then into August, not even a full year.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. And people really, were really appreciative that, cars came down from the Bay Area, Seattle. Did we get one from Seattle? I think wow, amazing. And people wanted to make the journey. I talked to a couple people from San Francisco that made a road trip out of it. Die hard and thank you to them big time because that was awesome. Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the cars that were at the show, the last iteration. What were the highlights for you guys?
I'll always choose the homely girl in the corner, as we used to say, right? So I was really very touched by the local family that brought the Fiat wagon and packed the whole family in, and they've been driving the car for decades. It was which Fiat was it?
Juvi's Fiat 124, I believe.
Yeah,
or 128 maybe.
And it was just so precious because it was so apparent that the car was a member of the family, and it was lovely to see that there. I also, on the other end of the coin, the triple white Countach that we had there was a culmination of teenage dreams in, sitting right there in front of us. Of course, there are lots of spectacular cars, but I think that the thing for me that made the cars my favorites is the stories that came along with them and the really palpable passion that people had about the cars that they had brought. They really, really felt it. And I think that really came across in the show. And then, of course, yeah, all kinds of sick cars that.
How did he feel when you wanted to fill his car with balloons, Bronson?
He was so cool about that. He's like, sure, whatever, no problem. That was one of the things that was really great too, is that the enthusiasm was kind of catching, and people were like, yeah, okay, we'll fill it with balloons. That's great. Oh yeah, we'll put it right here. Oh yeah, we'll run it down these ramps. No problem. Yeah, they were really, really very trusting and really enthusiastic about it. So
we built ramps to drive cars down a series of stairs, and some of those cars are very, very high in value and a little nerve-wracking, but over-engineered the ramps for sure. But what a sight to see, like Miuras and all these spectacular cars coming down a set of stairs on some ramps we built in my garage.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of trust.
Yeah. What were your favorite cars at the show, Dorian?
Oh man, I mean the goosebump moments
and motorcycles and bicycles.
Yes,
yeah, so much, and the show flew by in a flash, really. But when we got the opportunity to start the Maserati for the spectators and rev it for a little while, what's the year of that car?
A 1957 Maserati 200i that ran the 1957 Mille.
Yeah, I mean, it was parked under that big tree, and we announced that we were going to run it for 45 seconds or something like that, and people just made their way over there, and when he hit the key, we got goosebumps. I mean, everybody was just like blown away, and creating moments like that is something that we made a point to like make, and something we want to develop a little bit more with the show. But we want to not only have like visuals and walk around the cars, but we want to bring like an element of sound and motion to the show.
Yeah, it makes the cars seem more real. They're not just static displays. They're kind of living, breathing things.
Yeah. I mean, really flattered that we were even able to have access to that car. It was previewed for Monterey, which it went on. Did it go on auction, I believe? Yeah. But just the fact that it came through to our show first, and then not only did it come through, but it was started and ran and revved for a little while, was really, really cool. And you can't get that experience even in Monterey. Like you might go to the track and see that, but we were able to just create that moment, and I hope it's a good memory for people.
We had really absolutely amazing cars on there. It's really tough to pick any favorites. I mean, naturally, the Alfa Romeo TZ that we had is a very storied car with racing history here in California, with a pioneering female driver, Nadine Brango. And it's a good friend of ours that owns that car, so we know the history of the car. We met the family, we met Nadine's sons, and the TZ to me is the most gorgeous car ever made. I'm big on Zagato, and Ercole Espada is probably my favorite designer, pending the day of time. So having this car at the show was very special. But there were other cars. We had a fantastic Maserati Kamsen, totally underrated, that I loved. We had a Maserati Sebring. We had a Lancia Flaminia. We had a convertible. No, it was a coupe. We had Ferrari 365 GTC4. So that's all cars that are, a little bit off from the standard stuff. And we curated them. They were all silver. So we curated a silver moment with these cars. And it's really important to get these cars in the show that you don't see in other shows usually, or you have to have a second look to see them. And it was just stellar to have them. We had a Maserati RZ, Alfa Romeo RZ, which is a design from the late 80s, early 90s. Most people know the SE called Il Mostro, very brutalist design. So we had one of those that I love.
The Espada.
We had a couple. We had two Espadas. I mean, there were everything.
We had a real Stratos there, which is...
I mean, how bonkers, right? We paired the Stratos with a Miura and this gorgeous Maserati 200i that run the Mille Miglia. And on the other side, you had a Zagato build, all original ex-Targa Florio Giulietta Sprint Zagato from 61. I mean, everywhere you looked, it was just fantastic. For somebody that's so enthusiastic about cars and design, when we set the show up and the cars were there, when we loaded in, it's such a emotional moment to see them together and just realizing we have this gorgeous location, the LA River Center and Gardens, and you see these Italian cars there, and it can be a Fiat X19 or it can be one of 39 Alfa Romeo 1900 Zagato build, and we get passionate over both of them. It doesn't matter. Price tag doesn't matter. They're just gorgeous, and it was really immensely satisfying experience to see all these cars there.
You have to mention the second goosebump moment was the bicycle exhibit, and I reached out to Velo Pasadena, which is a very high-end bicycle shop here in Pasadena locally, and I asked them if I explained what we were doing, and at first they were like, "What? Show? What? Car show?" But after we did a little explaining, they reached back and said, "Yeah, of course, we'll bring some bikes." And he brought one of the Ferrari Colnago collaboration road bikes. And I was happy to have it, but I didn't realize he was bringing an entire display with him, including some of the original display material that bike was originally marketed with, much of it which was provided by the Ferrari factory. And then he brought the actual first bike, and turns out it was signed by Ernesto Colnago himself, which is a legend in bicycling. And if you look closely at that show, there was a lot of detail stuff that was just fantastic. The motorcycle thing's a whole other world, which you can talk about for quite a while, but bicycles and the two-wheeled vehicles, it brings a different energy, I think. The owners and the people that brought those machines are built a little differently than the car people,
I mean, it is a perfect match because prior to the automobile, there was a real bicycle craze from the 1880s into the early 1900s, and bicycle racing was the thing. And the Italians were very passionate about that, racing between cities. And then the automobile and the motorcycle kind of, made a new sort of competition, but it's all related. And all of those bicycle manufacturers, or many of them, got into automobile parts. I mean, Campagnolo, right? Just a great example of that. So
yeah, Campagnolo, the connection there is so strong, and it speaks for like the country as just a nation of like beautiful craftsmanship of vehicles. The Vespas and Lambrettas that were there. I mean, talk about like post-war reconstruction. Vespa really was the first. Like they were intended to put Italian people back on, make them mobile again so they can go to work. And Vespa's a huge part of the story of all these things we love so much. And the bicycles, of course, so yeah. And not to mention like bringing two-wheeled vehicles into that kind of spotlight and wrapping them up with the cars we had. They're really like, it provided an experience that even as the owners of the motorcycles and bicycles, they had never been to anything like that before. And it just made everybody into family, in its own way. And it was really cool. It was really a special feeling to have them around, especially since I'm an old Vespa guy and mod kid, like inviting old friends that I haven't seen forever and say, "Hey, listen, we're going to put your bike next to this $7 million Ferrari." They just didn't, they had never been around stuff like that before. And it kind of like came around, and really one of our original ideas was to like bring this to people that had never been able to experience this kind of experience that you only get in Monterey. So I think that mission accomplished in that regard, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's really hard to quantify all of the Italian design that's important. And I think we've touched on a few cars just to give people an example, but going into the late 60s, there's an amazing shift in design from sort of familiar shapes, sort of sensual and organic shapes, into a very geometric shape. And I'm talking about wedge cars. And of course, Marcello Gandini, right? He's the maestro. But I just want to hear about your perspective on those cars.
I mean, it's very interesting, right? When the wedge design started, there's so many fabulous examples out there that didn't went all angular and combined it with some curves. Bronson and I own a Alfa Romeo Junior Zagato, which, is a cheese wedge, right? It's a doorstop. But it has these absolutely amazing complex curves in there that you see on the side profile. If you look at the Countach, right? I mean, there's clearly a wavy line in the car, right? I think Giugiaro probably pushed it more to an angular design that then I think at Christian origami design, because it was really folded surfaces. And it was pretty influential, I think, because to me, one of the greatest car designs ever made is the Volkswagen Golf that Giugiaro did. And that you look at the Golf and you know exactly the Golf came when a Lotus Esprit was hit in the front and in the back, and that essentially generated the Golf. It's origami and slightly wedge, right? But brought into the tastes for the masses and for mass production for something that replaces a storied car like the Volkswagen Beetle. But that essentially what wedge design then essentially became, right? Together with three-box design. That to me are the more significant designs that still influence car design today.
I think it's so important to note that Giorgetto Giugiaro designed everyday cars as well as, supercars, exclusive cars. Isn't that sort of the litmus test for good design, that it can be everyday design?
100%. And I'll say one thing for the Golf. I never understood. I was too young to know, but I was always so attracted to that car as a kid in high school, and I could never tell you why. Just something about the proportions, the shape, very beautiful. Like somehow a little Econobox was very attractive and beautiful, like lusty, and I could never really quantify it. And it was like eye-opening, just really, honestly, just less than 10 years ago, and I realized that the designer of that car is actually the guy that designed the GTV, which is one of my favorite cars. Wow, it blew my mind when I found that out, whenever. And I was like, wow. And now it starts to make sense, and it's like, wow, that car is near perfection. Its proportions, the room inside of it, it's very well thought out and so iconic. And that guy, I mean, what a master, like really, like amazing,
Yeah, I would add to that because I kind of came to Giugiaro backwards because I liked the Subaru SVX and I liked the Isuzu Impulse from the late 80s, mid to late 80s. And I had no idea that was all Giugiaro until much later. And so now when I'm really drawn to something, it's never surprising that it's a Giugiaro design.
Again, we come back to other nations looking to Italy for their car design. The Japanese are a great example of that. So many Japanese designs were awkward and just kind of a hodgepodge, right? And then they hired Italians to clean things up.
Yeah, I mean, speaking on that, it's funny because I think the Japanese, kind of like me as a youngster, saw the designs and saw like, what is it? What are they doing? And we want to try that, and they tried. But there's way more to it than it might seem, and that guy really knew what he was doing, and that's where the art really comes in. You don't hear podcasts about, or maybe not so much do you hear podcasts about German design or Japanese design or American car design, but here we are talking about Italian car design. There's something about it that's very special, and quantifying it is difficult for me, but that's why we have Mike here, because he's much better spoken about
Mike, what is that crazy thing that Myron has?
Which one? Myron has an endless supply of crazy things
in the shroud of the fender wells.
Oh, Ford Probe.
No, it is a Nissan Zagato designed. Shoot, now I don't recall the name.
I know what you're talking about.
I'm trying to think of it myself. It's the Autech Zagato.
Autech Zagato. You got it. Yes, exactly. But that was a Zagato design. I mean, yes, it is in the school of wedge designs, but that was 80s, 90s Zagato. And I don't recall who the head of design was for Zagato, but it is very crazy with mirrors in the fenders, a very idiosyncratic design. Slightly wedgy, so it clearly has that. But going back to wedge design, you said something very interesting, right? You said something about design that then ends up into everyday products or everyday cars. And that is true. But what's really fascinating are these concept cars, right? We just saw them at Pebble, and kudos, shout out to, rather stodgy Pebble to do classes that are really interesting, eyebrow raising. I shouldn't say eyebrow raising, but more interesting than, endless row of pre-war cars.
Definitely more provocative than what you would normally see there.
More provocative, right? So kudos for them to doing 2 wedge classes, early and a late one. But the point is that these concept cars were so crazy. If you look at the Lancia Stratos Zero, I mean, it's impractical as can be. If you look at the Ferrari Modulo from Pininfarina, that thing didn't even drive, and it was built on a race engine with a race engine and a race chassis. So the current owner made it into a drivable car. So the concepts were highly, highly impractical, but they really pushed the design language right in your face, which was so 70s, right? Everything is like right in your face, and here it is. And kudos to companies like Lamborghini and Lotus and a couple of others who thought, let's give this a whirl, right? And let's put these cars into production. And these are now among the most iconic cars we have. You could look at the Miura and you see the DNA of a wedge design in a rather traditional swoopy design, but you knew where it was going.
And it was such a thrill to see Phillips Stratos Zero on the green with all the rest of those black mid-30s Mercedes-Benzes,
When I was a kid, I remember seeing the Modulo and the Stratos Zero and kind of having a violent negative reaction to it because they are so weird.
It's 2001 Space Odyssey, the beginning of those early man is just hollering at this block in the middle of nowhere. It has that effect, doesn't it? Like, it's just like...
Yeah. And I mean, it's like a kid spitting Brussels sprouts out. Like, what is this? And you get older and wiser and you understand the world better. And then it dawns on you how cool it really is and how bold and enterprising the people who created these cars really were. And the fact that corporations spent money on that, the 70s were not exactly, the land of milk and honey financially for anyone. So the fact that they were built at all is a miracle, but thank goodness, right? Because that was an amazing class of cars at Pebble this year. I did actually, if you guys want to check out the Horsepower Heritage YouTube channel, I got a whole video on Pebble Beach this year. So you'll see the cars that we're talking about. But yeah, really fun.
I mean, it was the late 60s, right, and early 70s, and you saw the writing on the wall because coach-built cars went out of fashion just because of economies of scale. And, aided by the fuel crisis and aided by more stringent safety regulations. But the wedge design started with high-end cars. It was the Miura. It was the Countach. It was these kind of cars that broke it, that have a high price point, so you can be a little bit more daring, and a company like Lamborghini still might make a little bit of money on these cars. And from there, then, it was the hand-me-down, right? All of a sudden, you have Lions futzing around with that for Aston Martin. You have Volkswagen futzing around with that for the Golf and Scirocco, and other companies coming in, right? But I think these trends usually start with the high-end cars simply because you can play with different profit margins and can be a little bit more daring.
Volkswagen is an excellent example because how do you as a corporation get away from the Beetle and the Type 2, the Combi, right? I mean, they were so good. They were almost a victim of their own success, and you hit a wall. These designs are now 25, 30 years old, and you've got to think about the future, and your corporation is on the line. And VW went in a completely different direction, and it worked. And the Italian design is a key component of that.
It is. If you trace the history of the Golf, I mean, it was developed for eons. I mean, this car was in development for the longest time, and in-house designs, a million designs for it, right? And most was pretty ugly, to be true, right? So, I mean, Chucharo to the rescue. Same with Porsche, right? If you're a company and your bottom line depends mainly on one car, you're betting the company on the replacement. And you got to build the replacement sooner or later, right? Same with Porsche with 356, Volkswagen with the Beetle, right? And, both got lucky. Not lucky, I mean, both cars that they then designed arguably are better than the original car. So kudos to them.
Dorian, it looks like you have some thoughts.
So many thoughts right now. I mean, it's funny because, underneath the cars and the design element is the mechanical element and the engines that power these things. And the Germans are known for being rock solid and reliable, and they don't really take many risks. And the Italians are the ones always being bold and pushing the boundaries. And, who gives a shit if it blows a head gasket every, 1,500 miles because this thing sounds good and hauls ass. And, in a strange way, they need each other, right? I mean, they lean on Italy for some of their bold, futuristic things to kind of lead the path towards what they want their design language to be. Alfa's, they leaned on that twin cam engine for a long time, and they were looking to move on. And what came next for Alfa, the big engine, was the Busso, which is regarded as one of the best engine designs in history, might be how that comes to be is such an interesting story that's hours long. But I mean, I just find it so funny how it's this symbiosis between the two. Do you push the limits? Do you take risks? Do you maybe, try something new that's a little bit more race bred and finicky and temperamental? Yeah, we do. We're doing that. And do we put it on the street? Yeah, we're going to put it on the street, and it might blow up. Okay, well, yeah, sure.
You all have vast experience in owning classic Italian cars, working on classic Italian cars, restoring them. If somebody needs a starting point, they want to dip their toe in the water, where do you start?
I get this question a lot, and I always tell people, what do you like? What attracts you? And tell me what it is, and I'll help you make some reasonably good decisions if I can, But a good starting point if you want to get into Italian cars is always the 105 series. But there's a lot of Fiats that not many people talk about that are really well built, very reliable cars if they have the right mechanic. The 124s, a little bit of an underdog, but what a wonderful little solid car, pretty well built too. And price wise, they're not expensive cars. I absolutely love X19s. I think they're such awesome cars, and speak about wedge design. I mean, those things you can get a really good one for less than 10 grand, sometimes much less than that. Parts are widely available. Mechanics to support them, maybe not so much, but they're pretty simple cars that if you're kind of a little bit mechanically minded, you can probably take care of it yourself. I have a Fiat 124 sport coupe that is lovely car, simple. Parts are widely available and really inexpensive, and they're quite pretty. They give a lot of that Italian experience, and it has a twin cam little Lampredi engine, which is half of a Ferrari 308 motor. Lots of good ways to go. Also, plenty of bad ways to go. You probably don't want to go buy a Maserati B-Turbo, or you don't want to maybe
Shamal.
Probably not that. I'd love those, but you probably don't want to have that as your first
buy a
Italian.
Shamal any day of the week. They're so gorgeous.
Gorgeous, yeah.
I mean, they're beautiful, but try to live with one.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't lived with one of those De Tomaso era bi-turbo cars. Okay. You hear all the horror stories, right, around them. I would think by now, if you have a reliable mechanic, they can probably take care of it. But it's not the first Italian car I would recommend.
Right.
I agree with Dorian. If your budget is anywhere between 20 and 35,000, which is these days entry level, you might want to buy a 105 series Alfa, a Giulia Bellina, a 4-door. They're practical. Bronson and I daily drove one for 4 years in Los Angeles, any time of the year, without air conditioning, and it worked absolutely flawlessly and beautifully, especially if you're in an area like Los Angeles, where you have access to people like Dorian and others that can really work on those cars. Absolutely fabulous. You feel like you're going to the supermarket and you're doing a Targa Florio leg. It is absolutely fantastic. Get one of those. Bring a trailer is your friend. Other websites are your friend. Lancia Fulvia, same price category, 25 to 30,000. Brings you a very nice Lancia Fulvia coupe. First, go for the first series. That's the prettiest one. 1.3 engine displacement. Easy to live with. People can work on them. You have a boatload of fun. So that's the cars I would really recommend. If you have more, buy a 105 series coupe. We were talking about Giulia GT,
we're missing a big one,
GTV.
We're missing a big one, which would be the Alfa Romeo Spider. Like ideally pre-smog because you don't have to deal with all the emission stuff.
Totally.
But Alfa Spider,
A Duetto or the Graduate.
really any of them. Like I would say 66 onward into the 94 model, or 94 is the last year of them. Beautiful car. Go watch The Graduate. Put the top down.
Yeah.
Wait till the evening when the sun's out of your face, and just nothing more fun than that car. And it gives you the full blown top down experience with that beautiful engine and the sounds and all about it.
By the way, that movie really nailed it, where Dustin Hoffman has that thing in full song, just like 4,500 RPM the whole way up the 101, trying to get to Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
To get to Elaine to stop her from getting married. I mean, like doesn't it make you kind of the hair on the back of your neck stand up when you think about that scene?
And what's really interesting about that at Macchinissima too, I had my goddaughter who goes to USC. She came to the show and she brought a bunch of her friends. These girls don't know anything about Italian cars. They don't know anything about vintage cars. And the Spider was the one that they all homed in on. They're like, this is so incredible. It was as if they'd never seen a car before in their lives. And it just really spoke to them, and they have no cultural references whatsoever for it.
It's interesting.
So many friends that have had fantastic cars or own collections of cars that have never owned an Alfa Spider. And I think they're truly missing out on a very lovely experience. Those cars are so beautiful and so delightful to drive and experience. Highly recommend them, even if you just borrow one for an afternoon.
You can get an amazing driving experience for a third or a half what a Porsche 912 is. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. That's why we do Macchinissima, because we want to bring these cars to people that have exactly the question that you ask. If I buy a classic car, how easy is it to live with? Where can I have the most fun? What's the most stylish? And there's only one answer. Go Italian.
And this comes back to what we were talking about much earlier, which is that, we need to reintroduce these cars to a new generation, something that you all are having a hand in. Macchinissima has hit. Everybody loves it. But where do you go next? How do you make it still interesting and new and fresh and not repeat yourselves? I mean, you can't stop now.
There's no stopping. There's no stopping.
There is no stopping. So here's what's going on, right? Macchinissima was, what is now? It's we got early October. Macchinissima was 2 months ago. Honestly, it was so much work that we are just digging ourselves out of the coma that happened after Macchinissima. But as Dorian said, we're very mindful of the vibe of the show, and vibe really then, it has to be the right experience for anybody that comes to the show. And we don't want to grow and sacrifice the quality for it, as Dorian said. So you can expect that it will be at another fabulous location. Where? TBD. We're talking about a lot of locations. Are we going more glitzy? Are we going more gritty? Right? So that's the possibilities. From the cars, we have pretty amazeballs and pretty grand and out there curation concepts, I can tell you. There's rumor of a red room, and that's all I'm saying. And I leave it to the imagination of everybody what it might be. But the curation will probably be cranked up to 11 for the next show. The other element that you can expect is we just want to make it a good party. We want people to be around. The cars are insanely important, but we want people to come to the show and enjoy themselves for 5-6 hours. So the food element, the musical element, the staging of the cars, how you stage them, the context you provide to it is all super important. And the good thing is, I mean, I'm the German, I'm the square one, but Bronson and Dorian are insanely creative and the ideas are off the charts. We have so many good ideas. Often, we don't even know how to pull them off or how to realize them. But I think there's ideas for at least another 10 shows that we have already. So there's two things, right? Shout out to the LA community. We sold out our second Macchinissima. We are beyond ecstatic. So everybody that has a passion in Italian cars, it comes from the community. Bring your cars, come to the show, see these cars, have a good time, have good food. And to all of the collectors, it's quite something to, explain to them what you want to do. And when you have a curation concept, you're pretty much locked in and you need very specific cars. The ones that came to Macchinissima too, I was so blown away how generous they were. I mean, we were talking about having multi-million-dollar cars putting over these ramps to get into the courtyard. They trusted us. They had fun with us. They laughed with us. It was amazing. So shout out to everybody that comes to those shows. That's the way, you can support if you want to have a show like that. That's the way to support it. And to the collectors, of course. We're showing their cars in a new context. And I hope they like that. And I hope they trust us that we display their cars in that context to just create a unique show that you don't see anywhere else.
If you guys want to point anyone to like websites, Instagram, anything like that, as always, I throw that in the show notes. But if you want to do a shout out for any of that right now.
Yeah, we all have Instagrams, Bronson Page, Baum, Dorian_Alpha. And one thing we need to say hello to and thank enormously is our partner Shake from the Mighty Motor, who was instrumental in bringing the two-wheeled vehicles, particularly the motorcycles, to the show. He's helped us out so much enormously, and he's a big part of what we do. Motorcycle guy, hardcore. And he helped us out a lot, obviously. The other thing I'll say is, you can look us up. I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole looking up Macchinissima videos on YouTube, and there's quite a few videos on there that are people put on their own experiences. They produce their own little videos, and it's for people that didn't make it to the show. I would ask you to please look that up on YouTube. It's pretty interesting. There's a lot of cool stuff, and people's perspectives and their trip there and their way home, and then walking around through the show is really cool.
Well, that's also a good way for people to whet their appetite and see what they're missing. And I would encourage anyone in my audience who just fly in for the weekend, go to Macchinissima, but also there's a ton of other stuff car related that you can do in LA.
Peterson.
The Peterson Museum, the Nethercutt Collection, the Lion Air Museum always has some really cool stuff going on. There's a number of, and also manufacturers and all kinds of car-related stuff in LA. We're so fortunate, as I said earlier. But I will put all the links in the show notes. Oh, Dorian, you're at DV Mechanics as well, right?
My business account, my shop account is at DV Mechanics, yes.
DV for Dorian Valenzuela Mechanics on Instagram. So if you're listening from the Southern California area and you need a good Italian car mechanic, and I don't mean fix it again, Tony. I mean, like Dorian is a crack mechanic. So look him up. But you guys, thank you so much for your hospitality. What a great afternoon we've had here. And I cannot wait for the next Macchinissima. So grazie mille.
Grazie mille.
Grazie mille.
That's all for this episode of Horsepower Heritage. Don't forget to check out the YouTube channel for more. And go to buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage if you want to support the show. Next week, I've got a special bonus episode coming. That'll be Wednesday, October 16th. So until then, I'm Maurice Merrick. Thanks for listening.